welcome back for session 2 of our online weekly Zoom chat to talk about how to support Arizonans with intellectual and developmental disabilities here in Arizona during the COVID-19 crisis. As you know, things have been changing hour by hour, if not day by day, and so a lot has happened since last Wednesday, and we're hoping to recap a little bit of that today. We sent out via email over the last few days resources that we compiled as a result of last week's call. That included a list of links that everybody shared in the chat box. We were helping each other out, and so we've compiled that list and posted it online, and I just put that resource in the chat box right now if you want to check it out. Dr. Erica McFadden from ADDPC also compiled a list of the top themes that emerged from last week, and we were listening to you. So we brought some special speakers today to address one of the major themes, and that was education, special education services. So today we have a couple of people who are prepared to share the latest, the very latest about both what schools are doing, what the Department of Ed is doing, as well as what rights activists are doing, advocates rather, with the Arizona Center for Disability Law. So I'm really happy that they are able to join us today, and we're going to still use that chat box, still use the raise hand feature like John said, but as you listen and have your own questions, don't be afraid to participate. That's what this forum is about each week. As long as we need to do this, we will. And I hope it was a positive experience for you last week. We felt that it was. One of the major resources we created as a result of your feedback was, of course, the frequently asked questions live document on Google Docs that you can access right now. We have a team that is constantly updating responses to your specific questions raised last week. Yes, covering education, but also respite, leave, pay, benefits, questions from providers, services. We're doing our best to update that as every day as we get the answers to your questions. So I'm going to post that link as well in the chat box right now. If you're on the phone and you don't have access to the computer, feel free to call our hotline and leave a voicemail if you'd like a personal email of those resources sent to you. That hotline is 480-356-5195, and we'll get you taken care of. And so I really am excited that we are back again here today, and I am going to pass things over to our special speakers. And actually, Jeff, did you want to introduce them for us?
Sure, yeah. Hi, this is Jeff Javier with the University of Arizona Sonora USED here in Tucson. And I'm pleased to introduce Alissa Trollinger, the Deputy Associate Superintendent for Exceptional Student Services at the Arizona Department of Education, and her colleague Angela Odom, ADE/ESS Director of Program Support and Monitoring. Following her, we'll have Amanda Glass, Staff Attorney for the Arizona Center for Disability Law. So Alissa, take it away.
Alissa, you may be on mute. I can't seem to find your name in the participant list, but we cannot hear you right now.
If you're joining from phone, you can try unmuting by pushing *6.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, I am only on the phone, so thank you for helping me unmute myself. Okay, so my name is Alissa Trollinger. I'm the Deputy Associate Superintendent of Exceptional Student Services for the Department of Education, which is a long way of saying I'm the State Director of Special Education. And I wanted to talk to you all about some federal guidance that we've gotten, some resources that we have available that we hope that will be useful to everyone. And I wanted to start off by explaining the role of ADE. Because I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding exactly what we do at the department. Exceptional Student Services is tasked with ensuring that the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is implemented with fidelity at the local level, at the district and school level. So we are responsible for ensuring that all the regulations that are in the IDEA, that we're putting out information, guidance, technical assistance, and working with schools at the local level to help them understand how to do the same thing. We also have other, what we call general supervision requirements. We're responsible for data submission, fiscal operations. We're making sure that all the federal dollars from that are given to states to implement the IDEA are implemented properly by the schools who are receiving them. We provide training. We really have a lot of different functions, but sometimes when people call into the department, they make the assumption that we're actually providing special education directly to students, and we're kind of the go-between. And we've spent the last 3 weeks of this school closure really trying to work with the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. That's the federal oversight body that tells us what we need to do with regard to the IDEA. And school closure due to a pandemic is not something that is addressed in the IDEA. The IDEA is notorious for being very structured, very complex, and very rigid, especially as it relates to timelines and services. And that's a very good thing because it makes sure that our students with disabilities are getting the services to which they're entitled. But it also means that since there is no caveat for pandemics, we're in kind of a gray area here. So we've had to wait for guidance. And we've gotten some guidance. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is the federal information that we received. There have been a lot of federal documents that have come out over the last several weeks, but the two that are the most relevant come to us from federal oversight bodies. The first came out a few weeks ago, and it's titled Questions and Answers on Providing Services to Children with Disabilities During the COVID-19 Outbreak. And it really answers some high-level questions. At the time that it was put out, not all schools, and still across the United States, not all schools have closed. But in Arizona, we have decided to close until the end of the year now. And so there were several questions that they asked and answered that are relevant to us. And the first asks, is a school, a district or a charter, a public school, required to continue to provide a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities during a school closure caused by the COVID-19 outbreak? And the answer is yes. During a school closure, if you're providing some kind of educational opportunities to all students, and all means all, that means students with disabilities are entitled to equal access, and that free, appropriate public education, that's the services that we rely on, those are provided to the greatest extent possible, and they use greatest extent possible on purpose. The second thing that they talk about in that particular question is the compensatory services that are also potentially required at the end of the school closure. And I'm going to table that for a few slides so that I can talk about that some more in depth. The second question has to do with whether or not an IEP team needs to consider a distance learning plan in a child's IEP as a contingency plan in the event of an outbreak. Well, that requires school closure. Clearly, school closure has already happened, and so there may be some public schools that are choosing to create contingency plans, but the Office of Special Education Programs does not require an IEP meeting to be held during school closure to discuss what kinds of services are going to be offered. schools certainly can do this if they like, but the intention is that they try and provide services to the greatest extent possible that are consistent with what is already in a child's IEP. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about the kinds of services that your children has received, and understand that everybody right now is receiving educational opportunities that are different than the norm. And then finally, there's a question that has to do with funding. What can the grant funds that follow the IDEA and are disseminated to states, what can they be spent for? And the answer is they can be spent for what they're normally spent on, any activities that relate directly to students with disabilities. And that could include, in this instance, in this context, it could include technology that is needed, additional services that may be needed, access in the form of a Wi-Fi hotspot if a student with a disability doesn't have it. Now, I understand that while these things are possible or allowable under the grant, I know that technology resources right now are scarce because everybody is trying to access the same resources at the same time, but it is possible to pay for that with IDEA funding. The second federal document is titled Supplemental Fact Sheet Addressing the Risks of COVID-19 in Preschool, Elementary, and Secondary Schools While Serving Students with Disabilities. And that was disseminated on March 21st. It was actually a Saturday. And the purpose for that was to address states that were concerned, not only states, but local school districts that were concerned about not being able to provide special education services in a way that would be fully consistent with the IEP and that would leave schools open to financial liability or risk of litigation. And so some states and districts were choosing not to provide educational opportunities to anyone. And this particular document, which was issued by the Office for Civil Rights and the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, basically says, please don't do that. Make sure that you make educational opportunities available to everyone. Do your best to provide services for students with disabilities in this unusual time. And they did not want entities to use the federal law to prevent schools from providing services at all. That would be inappropriate. They reiterated the requirement that free appropriate public education should be given to students with disabilities if educational opportunities are being provided to other students, but they encourage flexibility, like using the computer, internet, phone, or other alternate methodologies like instructional packets that were mailed home or independent learning projects or written assignments in order to try and provide services. And then they remind us all that we need, while we are all invested in schools in ensuring that students with disabilities get services, we need to be mindful of the CDC guidelines on health and safety so that we're not putting anyone at risk. And then finally, in this particular document, they provide an overview of timelines. There are a lot of timelines in the IDEA related to evaluations, IEPs, dispute resolution activities. And they gave an overview of where there was flexibility. And the kind of short view of that is there's not a lot of flexibility, but there is some. So now I want to talk about compensatory services. Both documents discussed compensatory services being something that is that needs to be visited at the end of school closure to see if it needs to be offered. And at the department, what we're saying about this right now is that we'd like schools to focus on how to provide the services and less on the compensatory services that need to be evaluated at the end of the day. But compensatory services are likely something that will need to be considered for students because it's pretty clear that it's going to be difficult to implement services on a child's IEP as they're written explicitly. So we're going to be providing more guidance on this from the department in the upcoming weeks, but really we've been focusing on what needs to be provided, and our next phase will be how do you provide it. So we'll be working on putting professional development and technical assistance together that talks about how you provide services in this particular environment, and then the final step will be at the end of school closure, what happened? Were there any skills that were lost? were there significant services that were missed? And do schools and districts need to look at compensatory services for individual students? So in summary, what we have learned from the guidance that we've gotten from our federal oversight bodies is that schools, charter schools and public districts need to implement free, appropriate public education to the greatest extent possible during school closure. We want teachers, administrators, and parents to be partners and to use their strong skills in being creative, constructive, and collaborative. We want to ensure that parents and families of students with disabilities are communicated with, that there's transparency on both sides, because I think in order to be creative and flexible, you need to be communicating with families to make that happen. We need to understand what's happening in the family environment and what's available in the school in order to provide services. We want to remind everybody to keep health and safety at the forefront when we're providing services. And at the end of the day, we always want schools and districts to consult with their legal counsel to make sure that what they're planning is feasible, is recommended. And then from a department perspective, there are monitoring activities and dispute resolution activities that we are responsible for under the IDEA. And we expect that there will be quite a bit of non-compliance, especially as it relates to timelines and services. And, you know, there's nothing that we can do to correct non-compliance. It is kind of a function of this time, but we will work with schools and districts as much as we can to support them as we navigate through school closure and work with corrective action in the future. And then the final thing that I wanted to point out is that we have a number of ADE ESS resources available. The first is a special COVID-19 webpage for special education, and it contains all the federal guidance I've talked about today, the local guidance that we have provided. It has a link to special educator resources, which includes visual learning supports and supports for students with disabilities or for teaching students with disabilities. We are adding to this all the time. Oh, and I should also say it includes an FAQ section. We add to this regularly. We at least will update on Tuesdays and Thursdays of every week, but it has ended up being more lately. And we want this to kind of be a one-stop shop for people as they're trying to figure out what to do. We're providing weekly check-in webinars for special education directors because these are the folks who are tasked with keeping things going during school closure. So we want to make sure they have opportunities to understand exactly what is expected of them and how to make this happen with all of the challenges that exist. And then finally, we have a dedicated email inbox, the ESS inbox, where anyone can ask questions, and as long as you give us your contact information, we can respond. If the questions are something that we can be generalized, or that can be generalized that we think would be useful for other people, we will put it up on the Q&A website. And that email address is essinbox@azed.gov. And that's all I have for today. I know that there are questions, and my colleague Angela Odom and I are here if people have things that they'd like to ask.
Alissa, could you repeat the email address again?
Absolutely. It's essinbox, no space, INBOX, @azed.gov.
Hi, Alissa. It looks like from our chat box, our first question for you is a question about how long the school year or how long schools will be closed. Were you talking about till the end of this year, May 2020, or until 2021?
Right now, it's through the end of this school year, so it would be May 2020. That was just announced.
Sarah, do you want me to run some questions for Alissa now, or do we want to have another speaker and then do questions all together?
I think that if someone out there has a question for Alissa, now's a great time to ask it.
Okay.
And you can do that via the chat box or, of course, the raised hand option as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on the raise hand really quick. I'm going to post a link on how you can raise your hand if you're on the computer. I've also learned that if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pushing *9. If you raise your hand, these are going to pop up to the top of the list for me. And then I'm going to try and call on people so we don't have lots of people talking at once. So I'm going to post for raise hand, you click manage participants at the bottom of your computer screen, and then the raise hand function should be at the bottom. But I will be sharing links to instructions for this as well.
Alissa, Christy asks in the chat, is it appropriate to provide one-on-one at-home services like OT and PT?
That's a great question. There have been lots of questions posed to us about OT, PT, and speech services, which can be provided one-on-one. And I cannot speak to whether it would be appropriate to provide them one-on-one. I'm assuming you mean face-to-face. I really urge people to consider the stay-at-home order that was just issued by Governor Ducey and to limit their exposure to one another. However, that is certainly an individual consideration, both from the student and the family and the district or charter that is providing the service. And the other thing that's wonderful is Governor Ducey also issued an executive order allowing teletherapy or telehealth services to be provided by those service providers. So hopefully that means that if families have access to technology that would permit telehealth, those services wouldn't necessarily need to be provided one-on-one in person.
Great. Okay. We also have a chat question regarding how districts are supporting ESY. Do you have any information for us about that, how districts are supporting ESY?
Well, if I'm understanding the question or the point behind the question, perhaps I'm wondering if it's asking if ESY will be provided following school closure. I want to point out that compensatory services and extended school year services, or ESY services, are two different things. Compensatory services are usually provided because of a loss of free appropriate public education, the services that students are entitled to with their IEP. And it's a loss that has resulted in a skill regression potentially, or just a loss of service period. Those would be individual determinations that were made, and they're not necessarily minute for minute. For example, if a child missed 20 minutes a week for the duration of the school closure, the compensatory service plan that could be agreed on by the district and the family doesn't necessarily need to tally up the minutes per week and then require provision minute for minute. ESY has to do with known skill regression or difficulty recouping skill during extended periods of time. And so that would be during the summer, for example, where you know that you've got a student who's just gained a critical skill and you don't want to lose it before school starts back up. They're similar, but they are different and they're arrived at differently. So I don't have any information that's different specific to the provision of ESY, but I think that we'll have to be providing more guidance on compensatory services. Their compensatory service provision is very normal, even during regular school operations. Sometimes services aren't provided for a whole variety of reasons. Perhaps a speech therapist went on maternity leave and was gone for 6 weeks, and for some reason the school wasn't able to provide another speech therapist. They could proactively provide compensatory services, communicate with the parent, and everybody would go on, moving forward without any kind of really formal action. But I think due to the magnitude of the situation, we'll be working with districts and charter schools to help understand how to do a review and then how to put together compensatory education plans as needed.
Great, thank you so much. We have another chat box question. And just a reminder, Nick, if you want to just jump in after this to see if anybody on the phone, we don't want to, has a question, we don't want to leave anybody out. But Andy asks, do you know if people who receive the empowerment scholarships will be funded for fourth quarter?
Unfortunately, I cannot speak for the ESA program. Those questions would need to be directed to the ESA contacts at ADE.
This is Chandra. I am a parent who receives ESA, and my understanding is funding started today.
Thank you, Chandra. We also have Nanette Zalasek in the chat who says, yes, scholarships still being funded and families need to continue handing in the expense reports. We will definitely link to some information about that so that we can have a good source for that. But thank you for sharing that. That's good to know. We also have a question from Amanda. How is ADE handling ongoing state complaint investigations right now?
My understanding is that state complaints are following the same timelines they normally follow. While all ESS staff are working remotely, consistent with the governor's stay-home order that went into effect today or yesterday at 5, everybody is still on the clock working remotely, and my understanding is that we're adhering to all required timelines related to dispute resolution activities.
Great. I know we'll hear from Amanda in just a moment a little bit more, but we also have a chat box question from Christopher. Going back to that teletherapy that you mentioned, Alissa, regarding OT and PT, for students who typically receive those services at school, how is ADE going to provide the teletherapy, and what is its relationship with access, which we know is allowed to provide some of that as well? What is the best resource to provide families who are concerned about the logistics of the services they typically get at the school for their child if they are a DDD member versus now with the stay-at-home measure in place?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that particular question, so I'll see if I can get all the pieces. First of all, the only thing I can speak to specifically is are services that are required to be provided by districts and charters. I can't speak to DDD services, and I apologize. I wish I could. The second thing is I heard something there that talked about ADE providing services, and ADE doesn't provide any direct services. All implementation of IEP services is provided at the district and the charter level. That being said, if it would be up to the related services provider, perhaps the OT, to determine if the services that were normally provided in a brick and mortar school and were outlined in the IEP, if they could be comparably provided in a telehealth manner, or alternatively, whether they could be provided in some other way that wasn't telehealth. I have heard, or I had heard, I would say before the stay-at-home order, that there were some districts that were choosing to do small group off-site kind of therapy. I really can't endorse or support any of that. That's up for each district or charter school to determine, and each family to make a decision about whether that risk is appropriate. And I really do feel compelled to honor the stay-at-home order that was issued, but it needs to be a conversation between the related service provider, the district or charter who's employing that provider and the family to make sure that what's being provided during school closure, any way it's happening, is going to benefit the child. I don't know if I covered everything, but hopefully I hit the high point.
No, thank you for that. That's definitely hitting the question where I think the person asking the question was trying to get some information. Essentially, a lot of stuff is left to the individual districts, it sounds like, as well as the providers. So thanks for that clarification. We do have a lot of questions in the chat box related to DDD questions. I want to assure everyone we will have some time today to talk about those a bit. Any other folks on the phone, just a reminder, you can raise your hand and ask a question related to special education by dialing *9 on your phone. If no one has any more questions, and we'll give it a minute, we're going to hear next from Amanda Glass, staff attorney with the Arizona Center for Disability Law. She works on special education issues often, and it looks like we do have a couple of more education questions coming in. Thanks to everyone for participating. All right, so Christy asks, just to clarify, with parent and school counselor communication, can special education related counseling services be provided via assignments for students to do at home? With weekly check-ins or sessions via Zoom? So just to repeat, with parent school counselor communication, can special education related counseling services be provided via assignments for students to do at home? Alissa, do you have any information for us on that?
Well, what I would say again is this is a conversation between the provider, the family, and the district or charter about what can be provided. So whatever is provided needs to be consistent with the licensure or certification of the provider, so that it needs to be allowable in their scope of work. And it certainly needs to benefit the child, be something that the family can implement, and be supported by the district. I think I have certainly heard of non-traditional ways of providing distance learning. It doesn't all need to be virtual or technological. I have heard of OTs who have been mailing modules, like short modules with instructions for parents on how to work on skills that were already taught by the OT when they were able to be in school, so that they can reinforce skills and perhaps prevent them from being lost during the school closure, even though the OT can't be there in person. So I know that there is creativity out there for distance learning options that don't involve technology, or that involve a mix of technology and parent or family support that can be provided. I think that's where the second federal document I was talking about, where it was really encouraging flexibility and creativity. So if you guys can come up with something that it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough to meet the needs of the child. That's what we would encourage.
Thank you for that. We have another question from Vicky from the chat box. She asks, if a babysitter is helping the student with online homework, is there any FERPA issues in communicating with the non-parent?
So if a babysitter was helping support lessons that were provided by the school, I would think that the babysitter, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that the babysitter was there on the behest of the parent, and would be privy to all kinds of information in the home, from education to personal, because they're taking care of the child. FERPA really pertains to schools, and if the school is providing information to the parent who's then passing it to the babysitter, I don't think it's a FERPA violation. But this is a very theoretical situation, and I don't know that the audience is schools and charters, but I would definitely encourage them to check with legal counsel if they felt like it was a risk. But again, in this instance, I think everyone is trying to do the best they can. And if a parent is working and a babysitter is the best way to make that happen, I would hope that the parent would be passing that information and it would not be a FERPA problem.
Oops, let me unmute myself here. We have one more question for you, Alissa, before we'll move on to Amanda. And it's also from Chris. So what is the ADE recommendation if a parent and a school district can't come to a mutual agreement regarding, you know, the way services are being provided? Where can families go? What's that process?
Well, if there is not an agreement about how services should be delivered or the amount or basically if they can't come to some kind of consensus or agreement on how to do this, then we always encourage parents to work directly up the chain for the district or the charter first. So if they've been communicating with the special education teacher or the related service provider and they're unhappy, please go to the special education director for that school before you take further action, just to make sure that you've exhausted all of the options available. And then certainly parents and families can use their procedural safeguards. They could file a state complaint. They could file for due process hearing. All of those remedies are still available during school closure because ADE is still working. Our dispute resolution staff is still active. But we really, really want you to, we're really hoping that both districts, charters, and families will work together to find solutions so it doesn't come to that.
Thank you so much, Alissa. We really appreciate you being here today and taking some questions. We are going to move on to Staff Attorney Amanda Glass with ACDL. And Amanda, I will unmute myself, or I will mute myself and go for it. Now's your time.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. Like Sarah said, my name is Amanda Glass. I'm an attorney at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I just want to clarify what my role is and what ACDL's role is. So you just heard from Alissa Trollinger, who is with the Arizona Department of Education. That's a government agency, our state education agency. And so she is speaking on behalf of the government agency. I'm not speaking on behalf of ADE or a school. I'm speaking on behalf of the Arizona Center for Disability Law, which is a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal representation to people in Arizona with disabilities. I specifically provide special education representation to students with disabilities and their families. So my role is to be an advocate for students and families. I don't represent schools. I'm sure there are some educators and school representatives on the call. I would encourage you, if you have specific questions, to reach out to your legal counsel, as Alissa said, because they would be the right people to ask. But I'm happy to answer any questions that parents have about the best ways to advocate for their children and their legal rights during this time. I will give a little bit of information first, and please feel free to type questions for me into the chat box or unmute yourself to ask. So Alissa talked a lot about the rights of students to be receiving FAPE, which is a free appropriate public education during these school closures. Again, you know, flexibility around how certain services are provided. So for example, if counseling is in a child's IEP, could that be provided effectively through a Zoom counseling appointment or a telehealth appointment? Could the goals in the child's IEP related to counseling be achieved through weekly phone calls with the counselor? Could there be homework packets related to the IEP goals that are sent home? All of that. Those are things that families should explore with individual school sites and special education directors. I do want to reiterate that communication is really important. These are unprecedented times. We don't really know, we don't have all the answers yet. We're trying to fill in the gaps as much as we can and communicate as much as we can, and we encourage parents to do that with school districts as well. Keep the lines of communication open and try to work together creatively to meet your students' needs during these strange times. All that being said, there may be certain services that your student cannot receive effectively during the school closures. And if that is the case, that is something that ACDL's perspective is that child is entitled to compensatory education in order to make up what was missed. As Alissa said, the standard isn't necessarily minute for minute, meaning, you know, if your child misses 300 minutes of speech therapy, and the school will agree to provide 300 minutes of makeup time. However, we would encourage parents to track that. So do keep an eye on what is your child being offered by the school district versus what is in their IEP, because it does allow for a starting point when we get to the point where we're talking about compensatory ed. It lets you know that, you know, you have that starting line of what was not provided and perhaps what should be provided through compensatory education. Another good idea, if you're able, and I know this is a lot to ask of parents who are already dealing with so much during this time, but would be to kind of track your child's academic and other special education needs during school closure. So for example, if your child was doing homework or there was some kind of you know, progress report or measurement taken just before schools closed, you could use that sort of as a baseline measure. And then when schools reopen, you could, you know, try to administer yourself while schools are closed, or ask the school once schools reopen to administer a second measure to see how much learning was lost during this time. And that could be another data point that schools utilize when determining how much compensatory education should be provided to your student. But we really encourage parents, try to track this, because your remedy at the end of this is, you know, try and get as many services as you can during this time and be creative and be flexible. But when that isn't feasible and doesn't work, there are a lot of students who are just not going to be willing to sit in front of a computer and do a Zoom session. There are a lot of kids that we, especially at ACDL, work with who have social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties, and it's not, you know, it's not going to happen. Obviously try as much as you can, try to keep your child engaged and try to be creative and work with the schools. But when services cannot be provided to a child, it's important that compensatory education be administered. And so our recommendation is that parents sort of track both learning lost, regression during this time, keep track of how many services are provided and what isn't provided. And then beyond that, be in open communication with the school and ask for an IEP meeting. The meetings, you know, if meetings have been previously scheduled, those can continue to take place remotely. Right now, I was on a meeting yesterday that was all telephonic and it went really well. Obviously, you know, technical difficulties can arise and it can be hard. Nothing's quite the same when you're not in person, but it's doable. And we had like 10 people in that meeting and we were all able to you know, use the conference line. And similarly, this meeting is going great. It's on Zoom and there's tons of participants, but we're all able to communicate and, you know, hear questions from one another. So use technology as much as you can to continue to engage in these processes that exist for the protection of students with disabilities. But parents, ask for a meeting when schools reopen to sit down and look at this question of what has this long-term school closure, what has the effect been on my child, and what can I ask for and what can the school provide to help my child come back from that as much as possible, or ameliorate the impact on my child as much as possible. For a lot of kids, this is gonna have lasting impacts. It's not something that, you know, we're going to be able to fix overnight or with a certain number of minutes of services, but we can work together to try to come up with solutions to help bring these children as close as possible to where they would have been had schools not had to close for purposes of coronavirus. I see a question on the chat box from Rosa Chacon. She says, my daughter was supposed to graduate this year. Will there still be graduation ceremonies? If not, can my daughter continue to next year? She's 19 years old. She's really looking forward to walking. It is my understanding that because schools are closed through the end of the school year, most districts have canceled in-person graduation ceremonies. I think it's a district by district determination. Alissa, I don't know if you're still on the call, but if you are and you want to unmute yourself, if you have a more specific answer to that.
Amanda, I don't have anything more specific. I think it's a very local decision. I know there were many public comments addressed during the State Board of Education meeting yesterday, but I don't know that the State Board of Education did anything about this because it's up to each district and charter how they want to handle it. I do think the State Board of Education was developing board rule around requirements for seniors for graduation as it relates to academic credit. And to be honest, I haven't read what they put together, but certainly that can be gained from the State Board of Education website.
For sure. So I mean, it's definitely something, Rosa, I would recommend you check in with your child's charter or public school district about what their plans are for graduation ceremonies. They may be doing like a digital ceremony that your child could participate in. The decision about whether your child will graduate or not, I think is a separate question from whether your child will be able to participate in a ceremony. So there are going to be a number of students this year who do graduate, earn a regular diploma, but may not be able to walk because of the COVID-19 crisis. And some districts may come up with alternatives like a digital ceremony, or they may host a ceremony at a later date once it's safe to do so. If you are not sure your child has met State Board of Education requirements for graduation, which is a credit hour requirement and a content area requirement, then that's a question about whether you believe your child is ready for that change in placement and whether that your child has earned the regular high school diploma. And I would say that's a separate question. I know the Arizona Department of Education has guidance about graduation requirements for students with disabilities, but I do think that's a separate question from whether your child will be able to walk or not, just because of COVID-19 right now. Chris Hall in the chat box asked if ACDL has a document or is one being created similar with legal options for families to address the questions they have. So we have the Arizona Center for Disability Law. We have been developing resources and guidance. Again, you know, similar to education, things change quickly. So we have things posted and then we are posting updates as quickly as we can. But yes, if you go to our website, which is azdisabilitylaw.org, and click on the news tab, we have lots of posts, not just about special education, but all areas of disability rights during this time. So please do feel free to check that out. There is a document, an FAQ document on there, and we will continue to post more information as we get it and as we are able to study it and develop our response to it. We will continue to post. Another question Chris had was, what are the costs associated with getting help from ACDL? Great question. We are free. We provide free legal services to anyone in Arizona with a disability. That being said, we do have limited resources and capacity. We cannot serve every single person who calls us because we get tons and tons of calls. But everyone who calls us gets something. It may not be legal representation by an attorney, but at the very least, that person will get information and referrals to other possible legal resources. In limited cases, when the facts presented match up with our available resources, our available attorney power, and the priorities set by our board of directors, we may offer legal representation by an attorney or advocacy representation by an advocate. So please, again, go to our website, azdisabilitylaw.org. There should be another tab that says how to get help or intake, and we run a phone line so you can call during our intake hours, which are 9 to 1, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and complete an intake over the phone, or there's also an online form that you can fill out to complete an intake that way. And I apologize, I'm talking quickly, and I know we have a captioner, so I'm going to slow down a little bit. Chris had another question. When referring someone to ACDL as a professional, what can we do to make the process easier for families? If the family consents to having you be with them during the intake, that's one way you could help, is you could call together and do an intake, and you may be able to fill in some of the gaps or answer some of the questions the family's not sure about during the intake process. We don't really have a fast pass, a way to work around our process, because everyone who calls does have to go through our intake process. But if you want to support the family by being with them during that time, that could be a big help. Another option would be to go on our website. We have a lot of self-help guides and resources you could print for the family, or you could read through yourself and share information with the families. So that's another option as well. And Sarah did share a link to our website in the chat box as well. Any other questions for me about the Arizona Center for Disability Law or about special education that you would like to pose to me? Okay, we just got one more in the chat box. If you are on the phone, Sarah, I don't know if you want to jump in. What do they press to unmute?
If you're on the phone, you do *9 to raise your hand. You can also do *6 to mute and unmute yourself. If you're on the computer, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. Or people are doing really good with questions in the chat. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Amanda, for reading them.
For sure. Okay, so I'll read Cynthia's, but if you have a question and want to raise your hand, like Nicholas said, use the raise hand button or use your phone. So Cynthia says, my daughter is deaf and has multiple disabilities and behavior. Consequently, online and packets of work are not possible. For those severely disabled students, are compensatory services when pandemic is over reasonable? And thank you for the captioning. And again, I will apologize, Cynthia. I was talking very quickly and I hope most of what I said was able to be captured. That's my fault. So Cynthia, if your child is not able to get access to a free and appropriate public education during school closures, ACDL's perspective is that she should be entitled to compensatory services when the pandemic ends. Again, my recommendation would be that you look at her IEP and track what services she's supposed to be getting versus what is being provided and engaged in. You know, it may be true that your child's class, the teacher is sending the same packet to every child. And if that's the case, that's great. And if she wants to and is able to engage in that work, that's great. But that would not be considered specially designed instruction for her needs. That's something that is more like practice or remediation for her. She is entitled to get specially designed instruction that is tailored to the goals in her IEP. And that needs to be provided to her as much as possible during closure. But again, if it's not possible, because your child has more extreme needs that it's just not feasible to meet them during this time, then compensatory education is something that you would want to discuss. And I, again, would recommend, as much as you're able, staying in touch with the school, trying creative solutions to figure out what can she do during this time and how can we provide her with learning that's beneficial. But also keep in touch about, you know, when schools reopen, what is compensatory education going to look like for my child? Maybe even requesting an IEP meeting more quickly so that that's something that could be discussed as a team. And again, IEP meetings could take place over the phone or over Zoom while schools are still closed, so you can work on a plan. None of us know when schools will reopen. We know for sure they're not going to open this school year. I hope, and I think everybody hopes, that this will pass and things will get back on track soon, ideally over the summer. If it's safe and we have guidance that things can start happening again this summer, for some students, they may be able to get some of that compensatory education during the summer. Again, I'll reiterate what Alissa said. Compensatory education is different from extended school years. So just because it's happening in the summer doesn't mean it's the same thing, but it may make the most sense, if it's safe at that time, for some compensatory education to be provided during what would normally be the summer vacation. But if not, you know, it's individualized. Each team needs to come together and figure out when is it most appropriate and effective to provide compensatory education, how much is needed, what type is needed, and that should be an IEP team decision depending on your child's needs. I don't see any other questions in the box. I don't know if anyone has raised their hand or wants to unmute themselves for a verbal question.
Don't see any hand raised, but if anyone, oh, is there a phone? No, it went away. Anyone raises their hands? I'll give you a call. See a hand raised here. I'm gonna unmute you. This is the phone number ending 2752.
Hi, this is Jenny, and I am wondering if parents choose not to participate in online schooling because of their own career demands or their own disability or other reason, what kind of repercussion can they expect where there are opportunities for school to be provided?
That is a great question. Alissa, are you still on the phone? Because I think ADE had a FAQ about this, and I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The answer is certainly parents can choose not to accept services during this time, but I would be cautious in doing that because the school will, at least for just be careful in refusing services, because it may mean that compensatory services, I'm trying to put this in the right way. If a school stands ready to offer services and services the services they're offering are appropriate for the child and would be reasonable, but the parent is not able to accept them, it may mean that there's not going to be an offer of compensatory services, or it might be different later. I can't make a blanket statement because every single student situation is different, but that's something that you may want to consider. I certainly understand, being a parent, having my children right here in front of me as I work from home, how challenging it can be to balance all of that.
And Jenny, I'll just chime in as well and say, as from a lawyer's perspective, if I were representing a parent in an attempt to get compensatory education, that's a bad fact that the school district's lawyer would bring up, that parents weren't willing to engage in the services that we offered to them. So I definitely do understand that it's difficult during these times. And I think we should distinguish between a parent refusing when a child is willing and ready, as opposed to the child, because of disability related behaviors, not being willing to participate. I think that is different, especially if the child's behaviors are documented in their IEP, and typically in the school environment they have a paraprofessional or an aide working with them, and that obviously is not happening in the home, isn't feasible necessarily to happen in the home, then it would be different. But if a parent is the one who's choosing to refuse, I think that's a bad fact from a legal perspective. Any other questions about special education from anyone on the phone or in the chat box? I know there are other topics that people want to hear about as well, so I don't want to take any more time unless people have questions. One good point from Cynthia in the chat box was, for students in group homes and IDLAs, DDD staff may not be able to follow through with educational activities. And I think that, that is, I view that as similar to the situation where you are a working parent and your child's in your home with you, and if the child isn't engaging and there's no one, physically with them, that's different. And I think compensatory education is more feasible and appropriate in that situation, as opposed to a parent saying, I don't want my child doing online learning. We're choosing as a family not to participate. I think it's different when there's a disability related refusal behavior, for sure. Okay, well, I'm going to be on the call for the rest of the time if there are more questions that come up, but I will pass it back to Sarah and Nicholas for the next part of the meeting.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I want to just give you a shout out for being here, and I think we had a lot of great questions. Thank you everybody for participating. We do have a lot of other topics that are swirling around thanks to COVID-19 upending all of our lives, and one of that is the nature of group homes now and group home services, as well as day programs. We've seen lots of questions in the chat box and via email today and over the past couple days regarding this. I understand we may have some staffers from the Division of Developmental Disabilities here today. So please, if you feel comfortable answering some of these questions, we would really appreciate it. We know that things are changing hour by hour, but our families and parents and providers are desperate for information. So I'm going to scroll back up through the chat box and pick out some of these questions regarding services provided by DDD. We are going to first, let me just scroll up, lots of activity in the chat box. Give me 1 second. Looks like we have a question regarding what DDD is doing to ensure group homes remain open. We want to make sure that the group homes have food and protective equipment for members and staff. What is DDD doing to provide these necessary supplies? If you have an answer, if you are someone who is working on this issue right now, please raise your hand on the phone or type in the chat box. We have heard this from several people that group homes are having difficulty obtaining PPE and have some questions about how to keep stocked up on food since grocery store shelves are not always full and ready to be there for customers. And if we do not have anybody who can answer this, we're going to take this directly to the division. Please be assured of that. We have been working with several of our contacts there to get answers to your questions, just like we did last week. Please refer to that FAQ page, but definitely worried about group homes being sufficiently supplied. We also have a question regarding the protocol for IDLAs and group home providers to continue providing in-home care. Now, there has been a link in the chat box. We will post that again. There is a page on the DDD website for the qualified vendor provider frequently asked questions. And one thing we were able to obtain since last week, those were being updated via PDF files. And if any of you have been clicking on a lot of these PDFs recently, you know that because things are changing so quickly, sometimes they become outdated rather fast. So I want to give a shout out to DDD for transferring that FAQ page to an actual website that maintains its link, and it's easier for us, it's easier for you to access. So let me go ahead and retype that in the chat box. Looks like Jessica has shared a link for guidance for group homes and developmental homes that DDD has offered. Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate that. So we also have a lot of questions coming in on prioritizing services. For example, as staff choose to self-isolate and not work, and our ability to provide services decreases, will there be any guidance on whether or not we can prioritize services, providing critical ATC services and not RSP? Thanks, Deneen, for that really important question. If anybody, again, has an answer, please jump in. We are going to work on getting some answers for you. I also want to remind folks that tomorrow, the Division of Developmental Disabilities is hosting their own virtual town hall meeting on April 2. It's going to be in the evening from 6 to 8 Phoenix time, I understand. We're going to post that link right now. And hold on just a second, we have some more coming in. Yeah, several people, Chandra says her daughter had to come home from a group home due to lack of staff. And we've definitely heard that before. We know that is a huge challenge. Staff getting sick, not showing up, members having to head to their parents' home or a family member's home. And we know that's a huge issue.
Yes, Michelle brings up.
Oh, we do, Nicholas.
Denise Baker, I'm gonna unmute you and lower your hand.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you. I appreciate this call very much. I did receive yesterday from a member of DDD the COVID-19 QVA guidance for congregate settings for group homes and developmental homes. I'm very appreciative, a good move in the right direction. I appreciate that the source is from the, I believe it's the New York State Department of Health and Guidance. So some good stuff in there, and definitely a good start, but there's so many more questions as I talk with other families and myself, and my husband is on this call as well, about specifics. And I don't know that this is the forum to get to those specifics, maybe, but if it's not, I just want to reiterate our strong desire and need for ongoing platforms like this one to get into specifics about group homes and IDLAs and perhaps DTA settings for vulnerable adults, similar to the way that we did today with the education questions. So just two examples that I would want to share. This document that was released, at least to me yesterday, describes some of the steps that would need to be taken. Well, not some of the steps, but some of the underlying conditions that put an individual at higher risk. But it doesn't say what the division or how a group home goes about the endeavor of protecting individuals with higher risk. Another example of specifics that I'd like to see drilled down to are in the event of an infection of a member. This document addresses isolation, but with individuals who have comorbid conditions, dual diagnoses, and the parents that are on the line and professionals too, this just raises significant and profound concerns for how is that going to look with the level of education that our well-intended good folks working in these homes have. Many of them don't have the resources to know how to manage what is potentially a crisis behavior, quarantining someone into a single bedroom.
That's a really good point. Thank you for sharing, Denise.
Okay, I'm going to unmute John Myers, who has a hand raised.
Hi, this is John Myers with the ARC of Arizona. And to answer some of those questions based on a conversation I had with Zane Garcia Ramadan yesterday, who's the interim director at DDD, regarding, for example, supplies, personal protective equipment, things like that, right now the division is not providing any of that to group homes or other residential settings, and they are not actually, they're not actually able to, but they are using all of their, all the information they have about availability, potential suppliers, and so forth, and they're providing that to the provider agencies around the state. When it comes to isolation or quarantine of people who are showing symptoms, right now there is no plan, at least according to Zane, there is no plan that is comprehensive for the state and that's been shared with providers around the state. But they are envisioning either using group homes that are not currently occupied, that are licensed but not occupied, or potentially using some day programs that have temporarily closed as quarantine sites or as isolation sites. They're still working through those plans. Nothing, again, has been set in stone yet, but there will be an announcement, and Zane expected it would be probably this week, related to how all of that will be handled. Right now, I would say, at least from our perspective, there is still a shortage of guidance. There is still a shortage of information, but the division is working on it. They just have the environment has been changing so rapidly that apparently it's been very difficult to keep up, as it has probably for all of us. So there will be more information available, and again, I would anticipate there will be more available on the town hall call tomorrow evening at 6. But right now, there just isn't a whole lot of concrete information available to families, to individuals with disabilities. And I sense probably that many staff at DDD are looking for a little more information as well.
Thanks very much, John. We're going to go to Dean Baker, who's been unmuted and had his hand raised. Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Most of my questions were actually answered by John. However, I find it difficult to believe that there are people on this call from DDD that don't have any direction or any clue in which way these group homes are going. Now, Denise and I are very, very fortunate to have a great provider, and they are doing everything that they possibly can, and with collaboration from us as well as far as supplies go and a lot of other things. So they're diligently working on it. So we are one of the lucky ones. But I will tell you that this is a very vulnerable population, and Tyler lives in a home, and God forbid someone, either him, his roommate, or staff comes down with this virus. There's no guidelines on quarantine. There's no guidelines on how these folks move back and forth between the kitchen and the bathroom. There are no supplies being offered to the group home. I mean, and I appreciate the educational part. I've been on this call for the entire hour. I appreciate that very much. Denise, I've gone through the educational part of this thing many, many years ago. But right now, I think this is a crisis, and I agree with the fact that things are changing daily, but we've got to be more quick on our feet with this, because this is a population that, in our opinion, kind of gets shuffled by the wayside, and we can't let that happen. I mean, if you have a provider that is not ready for this pandemic, this could be catastrophic in homes. I appreciate you listening to me.
Thanks very much, Dean. We're going to go back to John Myers from the ARC.
Yeah, and Dean, this is going to come as absolutely no comfort to you whatsoever, but I will tell you that I'm talking with my colleagues all across the country, and they are saying exactly the same thing in virtually every state. The providers simply weren't prepared for it. Nobody expected that it was going to be, even with you know, the months that we've been talking about this, most providers simply didn't have either the resources to adequately supply themselves or the foresight, if you will. So it is certainly not a problem that is localized to Arizona. It's something that people are facing across the country. I would also point out one other thing that that was clarified by Zane at DDD for me yesterday, and that is with the governor's executive order regarding essential services, staff of DD providers are considered healthcare workers under that executive order, and they can be required to come to work. I mean, to the extent that you can force people to actually do that, but they are considered healthcare workers under that executive order. So they are essential to maintaining services. And not only does that mean that they don't necessarily qualify for the Family First legislation provisions on unemployment, but they basically can be called in for hazardous duty, whether or not they're actually being paid for hazardous duty.
John, I appreciate, this is Dean again, I appreciate that. These people do a remarkable job, at least at Tyler's house, my son's. Hazard pay, I guess, should be included in this, I guess. I haven't thought about that. But I do know this. I do know that there are a lot of passionate people that are not just going to let this sit by the wayside, and I'm guessing that you're one of them. So, you know, we have to be, DDD is going to have to get prepared, and you have to get prepared quickly, because they're responsible for the members in which they serve. So my hope is that they move quicker than slower.
I saw a hand pop up, but then it went away. So if you had your hand raised, go ahead and put it back up, and I'll call on you. I just want to, there you go. Deborah, I'm going to unmute you, Deborah.
Yeah, hi. Are you hearing me okay?
You sound great.
Okay. I want to reiterate what Denise and Dean are saying. You know, this is a large crisis that is, you know, just waiting to happen here because no one is prepared. I will share that I was on a phone call with the CEO of my child's group home, and came away not feeling very confident that, you know, anything was really getting resolved. There's no quarantine plan He's concerned, you're saying that these are healthcare workers, they are considered healthcare workers, but in the meantime, he's sharing with me that he tried to get some masks because they don't have enough. They have 160 group homes across 900 square miles in Arizona, and they were told by people that don't know what you're talking about, and they didn't give them any of the N95 masks. My son's home went like 4 days without any antibacterial soap. When I found out about this on day 4, I stepped in. So, I'm wondering, staff not washing their hands. There needs to be a bigger push. And so the warning here being put out by Denise and Dean, hope that very quickly here. I would also like to add, if there are any way that DDD can maybe temporarily, downgrade some of these restrictions because you're having staff shortages. Parents are stuck at home anyways if they're out of work. Maybe temporarily, if a family member work for a vendor at their child's group home, that you can put aside the fingerprint check and the requirements for training so that the group home can access that as a resource as well. Because if somebody comes sick, these employees are paid like that's a big risk that, they're not going to show up. So I would like to put that out there as an out-of-the-box kind of idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. You broke up a little bit while you were talking, but I was able to understand most of what you're saying. I want to highlight I don't see any hands raised, so raise your hand if anyone wants to share. There's been some action in the chat box. There's some questions that are echoing what callers are asking for. I also want to highlight that Erica McFadden has shared a link to some DES information. She says there's some quarantine information and some good info for Dean if you click here. We have a hand raise. I'm going to switch it over to Kathleen. Kathleen, looks like you've unmuted yourself. Go ahead and talk.
Thank you. As parents, what I am finding, we just need to keep talking about our needs as family members. I know last week when I was on this call, and I feel so listened to, and I know, this webinar has helped immensely. I know some of our questions are being answered through the FAQ, that's great, and access has been answering. And I think it's hard as a parent sometimes to put everything out there, but I just keep putting it out there, and it's been a good week. I have found the agency that, we brought my daughter home because she's very medically involved, but DDD and the Easter Seals Blake Foundation, we just keep talking to make it work. So we don't, I was feeling quite overwhelmed last week just with all her medical stuff and trying to figure it out. And I think, we just have to keep talking, thinking outside the box, putting our ideas out there as family members, because we have good ideas. And I know some of the things have been streamlined as far as like first aid, because mine had expired. I work in the field, but mine had expired. But now because we cannot come in contact with anyone. And so now we're allowed to watch a first aid class online without coming into contact with anyone. So, for any parents out there, tell anyone else about the DDD webinar tomorrow. We just have to keep talking and working together, and it's hard and it is overwhelming, but I don't feel quite as overwhelmed as I did last week, because we just keep chatting it up and let all the family members know that about the DDD webinar tomorrow. And just some good news, I talked about the boy who was in the hospital, the young man. and his mom had been escorted out of the hospital. He's quite ill. They weren't letting him have any visitors, and she got to go the next day and be with her son. They gowned her up and did the special mask and everything, so her son didn't have to be alone. I just wanted to share some happy news.
Thank you very much for sharing, Kathleen. Thank you. Sorry, I muted you. There's some more questions in the chat box. There's a resource that someone shared to the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. And I just appreciate, all of the support and the comments people are making about, the power of families and the power of family sports in this time. I think that's something that we're all feeling. Any other hand raising going on?
Just also step in here and just recognize State Representative Nancy Bardo is on the call, and also acknowledge any other legislative staffers that are here as well.
If any legislative staffers or other folks want to share and you're on the phone, just a reminder, you can unmute yourself by doing *6 or raise your hand to talk by doing *9.
Just wanted to remind everyone that our goal for these weekly calls is to center at least a portion of them on a specific theme. And today's theme was special education, but it appears that next week's theme might need to be group homes, adult developmental homes, and how they relate to DDD. If you like this idea, please respond in the chat box, or if you have another topic idea, please let us know. We want to be really responsive to what you all are facing out there, what we all are facing, quite frankly. So please let us know if you like this idea.
Wow, Sarah, you got the chat box lighting up with that comment. I don't see any other hand raises right now. Natalie, do you want to shift over?
Sure. Make sure everybody can hear me well. Hello. I'm Natalie Luna Rose. I'm with I'm the Outreach and Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I know you heard from my colleague Amanda Glass earlier, and thank you, Amanda, for jumping on and being as knowledgeable as you always are. I'm just going to be here very briefly. We wanted to ask, and I know as I'm seeing the chat on my right side here be, well, it's kind of stopped for the moment, but it was going kind of crazy there for a second. Everybody has great questions and comments. So we also want to ask you, what are the top 3 items that need funding during this COVID-19 crisis? You can obviously respond in the chat box. I don't know how much time, we're technically going to be out of time soon, but I don't know how much time we can try to add for maybe just a couple questions. And then also I will put it here in the chat, my email. I'm also, I've been taking emails all week from our first call from people who had questions or just comments. And thank you to everybody that sent us nice comments about last week's call. We really appreciate it. I will put my email. It's nlunarose@azdisabilitylaw.org. You can also send us questions there as well, because we are all in contact pretty much, I think, all day, daily, since this has really gone on. Just also want to, piggyback on also Amanda's comments. can always go to any legal related questions or concerns or guides or handouts. You can also email me or go to our website at azdisabilitylaw.org. So, and thank you to everybody, all elected officials, their staffers, everyone else who has spent time with us today. But I think I will open it up to questions. I will say from Erica McFadden that there's a 4th congressional stimulus package, and so we're being asked questions for ideas for funding. So that's where this question comes from. So if you have any thoughts on that, please, again, send in the chat box. And I am typing in my email right now, and you also may email us or the hotline.
Thanks, Natalie. If anyone wants to raise their hand for a response here in our last couple minutes, please feel free to do so. I don't see any hands popping up, but there's still some great comments coming through in the chat box. So thank you everyone for that.
This is in response to Christy McMurray asking how do we access this chat. At the lower right of your chat screen, you'll see 3 dots. You can click there and save the chat.
I do see one topic in the chat that I think we can briefly address. Deborah mentions funding for parents to take care of DDD vulnerable adults at home. I know that there has been some back and forth about whether current guidelines allow parents of minor children to be paid to take care of their kids, or parents of adult children 18 and over to be paid and take care of their kids. Does anyone have any guidance on this?
This is Lisa with Absolute HCBS. We provide home and community-based services. We are seeing support coordinators approving hours for parent providers for attendant care and habilitation services, but it's only for consumers that are age 18 and older. We have not seen or heard any for 17 and under being approved for parent provider services.
I want to share Erica McFadden posting in the chat. Still waiting to hear more about caring for minor children from Access, but they have posed a question.
Thank you so much, Absolute HCBS. Now, people are asking if the chat log transcript will be available. John McDermott, Nick, do you guys want to address that?
It will be available. We'll download the chat after this meeting is done. But if you want to take it away right now, at the lower right of your screen, you'll be able to save the chat. So there's 3 dots right in the window where you would type. If you click on that, you'll have a save chat option. You can click on that and it'll download to your desktop.
We have a hand raised from Socorro that I'm going to kind of squeeze in here, even though we're about at the end of time.
Hi, I just wanted to let you guys know regarding the parents of adult children providing services and getting paid while we stay home. I'm currently in the process of becoming certified through one of the agencies here locally in Tucson, so that was great. The only thing that's holding back the end of the process is for me to take the Article 9 class, which I did take alone very, but I guess I need to be updated on it. And once that's done, then they can proceed to put me on their payroll so that I can stay home and still have a paycheck coming in. I'm still waiting to hear from the agency to see if I can take an online class so that I can fulfill the requirements to be a provider. So I just wanted to give you guys just a little info that it's, that's what they're trying to do right now. And this is all being done through my DDD support coordinator. So, if you have any questions regarding that, you can also call them. They will be a great source of information to see what's out there to help you guys out.
Thank you so much, Socorro. And we have some people responding in the chat box with different companies that are providing Article 9 classes online. So feel free to check those out. I see APT, Practical Training Solutions. So thank you for sharing those resources. Vicky is asking, what about parents who are the legal guardians of the child? Can they be a provider and a guardian at the same time? I assume that this is referring to adults over 18 who have a parent or a family member as their guardian or another individual as a legal guardian. Can they be a provider and a guardian at the same time? Does anyone have that information? Maybe Amanda from ACDL or Natalie? Oh, Al Nieto responded in the chat regarding caregivers. Parents of adult members can be paid as caregivers. DDD is currently working on possible approvals for children under the age of 18. Thanks, Al, for that info. Looks like DDD training department in Tucson is also holding online trainings. They just had an Article 9 training this week. Thanks, Gina, for sharing that information. Any answers about the providers and legal guardians being one and the same? If not, we will make sure to research that for you.
That is a good question. Hi, this is Natalie from ACDL. That's a good question. I don't know if my colleague Amanda is still on. If she's not, then we can work on answering that question for you. Thank you.
Socorro, it looks like you want to add one more comment. Your hand is raised. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add regarding the last questions, whether you can be the legal guardian of the child. I am, the mother and legal guardian of my son, and he's 24. So as far as I know, you can be a guardian. It's not being prohibited to be the legal guardian in order to get paid to take care of your child, as far as I know, because that was one of the questions I asked at the beginning of trying to get all this sorted out. But that's a question that can be asked to the DDD providers as well. But as far as they told me, that didn't really matter whether I had legal guardianship or not.
Yeah, I encourage everyone, to follow up with DDD with these questions, but I will say in the chat box, there's a few people that are kind of agreeing with a positive response to that question. Lisa clarifies, yes, they can be providers if a member is 18 or over, but they can only provide ATC or HAH as approved by DDD. I'm going to call on Christopher Hall, who has his hand raised. I'm going to unmute you, Christopher.
I am actually, I hate to put myself out there. I am a support coordinator within DDD. So to kind of answer the question, and I think somebody answered it pretty correctly there. When it comes to guardianship, if the member is over 18 and the parent is the guardian of the individual, other services would not, like let's say respite, for instance, that is designed to give the primary caregiver a break. If you're the guardian, you can't give yourself a break. You're not getting the break. So there are services in which that would not be applicable. But yes, after 18, some services, there is that possibility. But of course, everything is on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. We still have some activity in the chat box, so I think we're going to keep open the Zoom call for a little bit, but that's the end of our content today. And as you know, we'll be back next Wednesday, 11:30 Phoenix time, and we are going to work hard to get some folks in leadership over at the Division of Developmental Disabilities. It sounds like we'll be focusing on day programs and group homes, as well as adult developmental homes next week. We know a lot can happen between now and then, but just stay engaged. We've shared multiple email addresses where you can reach out to myself, Natalie Luna Rose at ACDL, as well as IHD. And just feel free to keep those questions flowing. We will be updating that Google Doc with frequently asked questions. So thank you so much for participating. Natalie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, just again to enforce all my colleagues on this call, the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Network, just want to thank them for their hard work as well, and all of you for coming in and spending the last hour and a half with us. And just keep those questions coming. Again, nluna@azdisabilitylaw.org. You send me comments, questions, concerns. I'm doing my best to get back to them as quickly as possible. And we hope to see you all again next Wednesday. Bye, everybody.